You're with Steve Austin on ABC Radio Brisbane.
6:09. Today is World Mental Health Day, a day that aims to raise awareness of mental health issues around the globe and promote positive mental health and well-being. I normally avoid, such and such days. I think they're overdone. But this one intrigues me for a range of reasons. The Black Dog Institute says that almost half of all Australians will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. Half of us. That's a really whopping great figure. And I want to look at why. Why are so many Australians here in one of the wealthiest countries in the world with natural beauty, vast areas of open landscape and land, beautiful beaches, compared to much of the world, almost perfect environment and pristine horizons? Why are we so mentally unwell? Are we perhaps being diagnosed too easily when what we're feeling is simple sadness or grief or other painful ways life can sometimes make us feel? My guest is psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. She's from North Brisbane Psychologists. Rachel, good to speak with you again. Thanks for coming on ABC Radio Brisbane.
Yes, hi Steve. Thanks for having me.
What's the literature say about why Australians, nearly half of us, will experience a mental illness in our lifetime? That seems to be a really large figure in my mind.
It is. And I think the answer is really quite multifaceted. You touched on the issue of overdiagnosis in psychiatry and psychology. And while I can talk very easily about the benefits that can come with diagnosis, there is some evidence to suggest that we are actually overdiagnosing some people with certain disorders. So that would push up those numbers. I think there's also the issue of increased awareness. I believe World Mental Health Day started in 1992 when I was just starting at university, and I really think since then there's a lot more knowledge and awareness out there. So people are coming forward when they didn't before.
Yep.
And another reason that I'll mention is that such a big part of our mental health has to do with relationships. Yes, we live in a beautiful, lucky country, but our relationships are perhaps not what they used to be either. And technology, the pace of change, and a whole range of other factors have affected, our relationships in our communities. And this is actually the core of mental health, is having good relationships.
Let me pick up on that one. I actually think that one's a really significant one. Can you speak, given that you're with North Brisbane Psychologists, what do you see with clients who come in the door and you discover that they've got a broken relationship or a disconnected relationship, or they're disconnected from their community? Can you just talk with me about that, please, those where disconnections take place?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing it across the lifespan. So when we see kids and teenagers, often we're seeing, it's such a big question that you've asked.
Sorry.
But we are seeing more mental health. No, that's okay. I'll say a few things. There's an increased awareness, as I mentioned, and we see an increase in diagnoses amongst kids and teenagers. There's some social contagion that's going on, but I think technology has affected all of us in terms of our brain development and our attention spans. We're seeing more bullying, or perhaps we've just got more awareness of it. So we see some social isolation and emotional isolation among young people. The divorce rates, gone down a little bit, but it's still much higher than it was 50 years ago. I was actually speaking earlier to one of your colleagues, Ashwin, about how, the rules and the formulas used to be in place. You got to a certain age, you got married, you had kids, you didn't get divorced. That there was social stigma there.
Yep.
So much has changed in the last few decades, and the rules and the formulas for living life have really evaporated in many ways. And now we're making, our own meaning and our own rules and trying to figure it out. And we're seeing that in some of these statistics. And you can have 1,000 friends on social media, but be very, very lonely. People everywhere.
The same reason why you can actually be lonely in a crowd, because you're not actually connecting in a deep and qualitative way with anyone.
Lonely in a crowd. And the cost of living means often we have families where both parents are working full-time. That negatively affects their relationship. So they're lonely in a marriage. We see quite a bit of that. We do a lot of couples work in our practice. and we're seeing couples who are very disconnected, emotionally distant, and living under the pressures of financial stress while raising children, running businesses, building careers. It's a lot.
I want to come to the lonely in a marriage one in just a moment, but let me just stick with sort of the young people thing. So I didn't do the story, but last week there was a quite widely reported story about young people and devices, digital devices, mobile phones and more, that they were, the sense of loneliness, disconnection and ill mental health problems is increasing in line with use of those devices. And I'm not, do you see that in your clinic?
Well, I've only been practicing in private practice for 11 years, so I'm comparing now to only 10 or 11 years ago, but I'm also comparing it to how I grew up, and I'm in my late 40s. And before the internet, being a teenager then, I think it's quite a different experience looking at my teenagers now. I have teenagers who handle their internet usage very well, so I feel very grateful for that. But I see many in my clinic who, we all know the issues that the internet has brought for young people. Fear and shame around, am I as good as these other people? This is also in adults. We get the Snapchat and the Instagram sort of culture where there's a lot of social comparison. People feel bad about themselves. We see cyberbullying amongst high school students.
Yeah.
And a lot of behaviour that people wouldn't be brave enough to do to someone's face, but they're brave enough to be cruel online.
Tell me about loneliness in marriage. You assume that because you're married, you're not lonely. And I know a few people in this scenario. They've even got someone they like, but nevertheless, they still feel lonely in their marriage. Tell me about that, if you would, please.
Yeah. So, we're hardwired to bond. And in the beginning, we're usually quite focused on that person. We're turning towards them, making lots of bids for connection, showing a lot of appreciation. And the momentum of that can slowly fall away over the years, and that's quite normal. And couples don't realise it. It's a bit like the boiling frog. The frog doesn't realise the water's getting hotter until they find themselves quite emotionally isolated from one another.
Yes.
The friendship between them starts to fade, the conflict levels start to go up as the pressures of life kick in as well. Once children come on the scene, perhaps they've got ageing parents. I see a lot of my clients sort of 35 to 55, and that's what they've got. They've got high pressure, jobs, they've got financial stress, they've got kids, and then they've got ageing parents. They're really the meat and the sandwich stage of life. And all of those things can also put strain on marriages and come between people. And if they don't have good skills around communication and conflict management, then they don't deal with their problems, they don't face them, and they just pull away, withdraw, and end up quite distant.
Isn't it funny? Yes, they still actually like the person. I'm told that this is quite common when the children actually leave home, and the two people who did actually like each other, when the relationship has drifted, when the kids leave home, there's nothing there that gives them united purpose anymore. And they either rebuild it or rediscover something, or else they're in trouble.
Or they end it, or they just live miserably. There's only three choices, really. Yeah. Stay miserable, end it, or find your way back to one another.
My guest is psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologists. Today's World Mental Health Day, and normally I sort of try and avoid days because they're dime a dozen, but in my mind this one is significant. I understand that the very term sort of mental illness has really broadened out. Like what we regard as a mental illness today is far broader than it used to be. Rachel, is that the case? Yeah. A couple of my listeners would like you to define mental illness for us. I'm not sure if that's an easy job or not.
Sure. No, well, it is and it isn't. Like everything in psychology, it's, I'm in an inaccurate area of science, as are medical doctors, but we do our best, and it's better than nothing. So mental illness or mental health disorders, which is more the phrase that mental health professionals use, is when somebody's sort of behavioural, mental and emotional struggles start to interfere with their functioning in one or more significant areas of life. So like you said before, all of us feel sad sometimes, and that's a natural reaction to a situation that, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, as they say. Same with anxiety. But when feelings like anxiety or sadness become chronic and debilitating, and they're affecting our social relationships, our ability to work or study, perhaps our health, then it actually creates some disorder in our lives, and that's why we call it a disorder. I don't actually really like that word. I think it's quite stigmatizing,
Right.
but I understand why we call things disorders. And yeah, it's once people start to realize this is actually really interfering with my ability to live my life and function, that we've got an illness.
Okay. My guest is Dr. Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologists. So, given that in your clinic, the big issues you see are relationship problems and people's sort of broken connections, whether they be young people or married people, they're lonely in a marriage. What's the best ways you've seen to reconnect, to re-establish healthy connections, Rachel?
Yeah, well, it's all sort of on a case-by-case basis, I guess. It depends whether you're talking about the couples work that I do versus individual work, where I see a lot of loneliness, and I've encouraged people. I've actually told a lot of my individual clients to check out the Meetup website and join a social group. You know, there's a social Meetup group for almost anything you're possibly interested in. And
if you've got the time.
If you've got time, I mean, you've got to make the time. You've got nothing. It doesn't matter how rich you are if you don't have your mental health, I often say.
Yeah, fair enough.
So you've got to make the time. I had this client come back to me a few years ago and said, I went to that website and now I've joined this dragon boating group and I've met this nice guy. And I'd never even heard of dragon boating. Wow. There's a bit, whatever you want to do, it's out there somewhere. Particularly, it's easier if you live in a big city like Brisbane, obviously. But you know, we do need to be brave, and we do need to confront our social anxiety if we've got it, and maybe get treatment for it so that we can reach out and participate in life. Extroverts perhaps want to do that more than introverts, but all of us have an impulse to participate in life. We all have a need for connection and belonging. So working with a coach or a therapist, or, you know, somebody who's got the skills to help you put yourself out there and re-engage with life is so important for your mental health. And in marriages, wow, I could talk about that all night. There's so much that couples can do, but often it's a lack of skills and awareness that gets in the way. So coming to couples therapy is life-saving for some marriages, and, you know, learning the skills around communication and conflict management, as well as strengthening that friendship, because long-term relationships are still about having a good friendship and knowing one another's world and expressing appreciation and all the things that the couple did, you know, back when they liked each other and when they first met. Not all marriages can be saved. You know, we absolutely know that, but many can be, and so people need to be proactive.
It's worth the effort, nonetheless.
Yes.
Rach,
people spend more on getting a new roof of their house than they do on the relationship underneath that roof, which is ironic.
That's a good line. I must remember that. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologists. I've got to remember that line. People spend more time working out how to build a new roof than they do the relationship that sits underneath that roof.